All right, Miles, let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens, a team you and I spend a lot of time on for really good reason. This is one of the more exciting teams in the NFL. And one of the more exciting aspects of this team is the progression of Lamar Jackson through his career into the kind of player you and I both know he can be. We have some evidence, and I know you've done the research and have some stats that will support some of that growth in Lamar Jackson. But before we get into that, Ravens fans, look, obviously with the win against the Jets, you saw Duvernay get a lot of targets, Bateman got involved. What receiver in this upcoming game against the Miami Dolphins do you think Jackson will target the most? Which receiver do you think will get on the stat sheet the most? Let us know in the comment section below. But Miles, what do you have with Baltimore and Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, Nick. So when we look at Baltimore throughout the last year or two, it's been an explosive offense in a number of different ways, but it's always felt like it was missing one aspect, in my opinion. They've always had one of the best, or I'd say the best rushing attack, probably in NFL history the last few years. It's been a pretty incredible sight to see. They've had a lot of good, short, intermittent passing, but the thing that you lack fear of when you face Baltimore was that of the long ball, that, surprise 40-yard touchdown pass. It really didn't happen too often. And I feel like that was partially Roman's fault, maybe partially Lamar's fault. But after last game, it has all been worked out. And I'm going to read you these statistics, okay? Per Football Outsiders, Lamar Jackson's average depth of target was 13.1 yards in week one, and that was the highest in the NFL. And on top of that, he threw 9 passes that were 15 plus yards down the field, and 3 were for touchdowns. So that's 3 big balls there for touchdowns and 9 total, like, big chunk plays. So, what do you think about that?
Well, so the Ravens are kind of an interesting dynamic because you brought up their running game and their explosiveness and their running game is that you kind of think it would naturally be easy for them to have big plays and
Yeah.
just work through it and things like that. But that really hasn't been the case to your point. I think in 2021, according to sharpfootballstats.com, the Ravens were about middle of the pack in terms of explosive pass play percentage, which is kind of strange because you look at the teams at the top of the list are usually teams that run the ball well. 49ers were really high up. The Cowboys were high up. The Eagles were high up. The Eagles, of course, run a sort of similar offense. So you'd expect the Ravens to have a lot of success in the deep passing game, and they just haven't in recent years. And a lot of that, I think, goes on Hollywood Brown. I think they kind of forced Hollywood Brown to be that kind of player a little more. It wasn't really natural. But give a lot of credit to Jackson, his growth in the passing game, and really a lot of credit to Roman, like you alluded to. But I do want to point out one thing that is really happened against the Jets that I really like is that everyone plays the Ravens with a single high safety, one deep safety. They bring a safety in the box to play the running game or the tight ends or both. That means one receiver or both receivers will have favorable matchups. It really doesn't matter who. You don't have to force it to a specific guy. And that's exactly what we saw with the Ravens against the Jets. Duvernay got involved with a couple scores. Bateman got involved with a big score. So throughout the game, if Roman is smart and it looks like he's heading that way, he'll figure out when he can isolate a receiver on a favorable matchup because they're going to get it. Because remember, there's only going to be one deep safety and they can take advantage of it. And I think that's a track they're going on. I think it has a chance to be really successful.
Yeah, and another big one I want to attribute to this passing game growth is like Keith Williams, the Ravens passing game coordinator. He came in last year, or I believe the year before. I think it was last year, though. I'm not quite sure, but that's not important to this. But since Williams has been here, I think the passing game and the route concepts and all of that has really evolved. They used to be really simple in Roman's run heavy offense. It was kind of the pass was to open up the run almost, but now I feel like the run, which we're naturally good at, opens up the pass. And that's what you've been saying is these typically run heavy teams are able to hit these long balls. And that's what we're growing on. And that's what we're growing into as an organization. I believe that Baltimore is going to try to be run heavy. Obviously, none of the star running backs for Baltimore were playing in week one. So that probably contributed a little bit to I'd say a subpar rushing attack in that aspect. But when they come back, that running game going to be hitting hard. Lamar, it took him a minute to get back into the swing of things. Obviously, he didn't really play in the preseason, but once he got back into it, he was making plays with his legs. People were keeping that in the back of their mind for the rest of the game. And that's when the long ball really started to come out of his hands. It exploded on to the screen as everybody saw. So I thought that was very interesting. It's a pretty cool update. And I'm really excited to see how this comes into week 2 versus the Dolphins. Obviously, Baltimore has had some success and some failures versus the Dolphins, but I do believe they played week one 2 years ago or so, 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it was like a 59-0 game. It was
59-10, I think something like, yeah.
59-10. It was a pretty big game by Baltimore. And there's a lot of big passes. Hollywood Brown caught 2 long touchdowns in that game. So let's see if they can replicate that success here going into week two.
And I think one point to bring on, obviously the big question mark is what's going on at left tackle. But remember, Jackson had those big plays against the Jets, a lot of them, when James already got hurt, who was already their backup left tackle. So remember, he has that confidence. I think part of the Ravens came out slow against the Jets is they weren't exactly sure how that pass protection was going to hold up in certain situations. And if they used to play action game accordingly and take big shots when it makes sense, it can really mitigate that issues in protection, potentially on the left side as they wait for Stanley to come back. Whether he comes back in time for Miami or not, that we don't know at the time of the recording. But I think that he was able to complete those big plays against the Jets, kind of gave Jackson and Roman that confidence that they'll be able to complete those big plays regardless of who's out there at left tackle. So I think that's a real positive indicator going into this Dolphins game.